Hello, everyone, and welcome to, I don't know if I started too soon, but hello, everyone. Welcome to our November book of the month. Today, we are so excited to be joined by the author of Arsenic and Adobo, which was a fantastic, fantastic read. Please be warned that we will have spoilers going into this chat. So if you haven't finished the book yet, feel free to finish it and then come on back. We're happy to discuss it with you, and you're also welcome to continue discussing it with all the book club members across our social media platforms, specifically Discord, which is where we have most of our spoiler-filled discussions. But just as a quick introduction, hi, my name is Tiffany, one of the co-hosts of Subtle Asian Book Club.
And I'm Alexandra, also another co-host of Subtle Asian Book Club. And today we have our special guest. Mia, would you like to introduce yourself and your books? And as a quick icebreaker, what has been like your favorite thing recently?
All right, yeah, sure. So I'm Mia P. Manansala. I use she, her pronouns. My debut novel, Arsenic and Adobo, which all you kind people were reading this month, came out earlier in May. It's the first book in the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series. I currently have a 3-book contract, and I just turned in book 3 earlier this week. So fingers crossed that my publisher wants more. The second book in the series, Homicide and Halo Halo, comes out in February 8th. And then the third book, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the title yet. It supposedly comes out in October of next year as well. So 2 books come out next year. And let's see now, my favorite thing recently. Oh, sorry.
I love that we don't have to wait too long because I think I don't remember when this book came out. But I was like, okay, this is perfect because I have some breather time. And then February it's out. I'm going to be able to dive into it. And now you're just telling me even more great news that we can dive into another one in October.
Yeah, they all want them like 8 to 9 months in between, which is like, whew, considering it took me like a year and a half to finish the first book, being on contract is like, you got to move. It's really different.
Yeah, it's pretty fast.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. What did you want to talk about that was like your favorite thing or something you've been loving recently?
Like I turned in book 3 like literally on Monday of this week, like just earlier this week, just before my birthday. So I finally feel like I get to catch up on all the things I haven't been doing because I haven't been reading, I haven't been watching anything, I haven't really been playing many video games. My friend, so like my husband and I, we do like Netflix watch parties with like our couple friends, and so we kicked off like our holiday movie watching thing with the Princess Switch 3. Which is like such a ridiculous movie, but it was so much fun. So I really am looking forward. Like my friend even made like a spreadsheet with all the holiday movies we're going to be watching together. So I'm really looking forward to watching just like fluffy, ridiculous holiday movies to kind of decompress after that intense deadline.
That sounds
truly
so
the greatest time of year.
Do you like to watch do you like to like binge watch all at once or like one movie a day type of thing?
See, like I'm really bad at watching things because I have such a terrible attention span. So like that's why I like books and video games because I tend to engage with them more. But once in a while, like I'll be like in the mood to watch something and then I tend to binge. So like I can go literally months never watching anything. And then I'll spend an entire weekend. It's like, oh wow, I watched like 3 anime series. This is awesome. Like it really, really depends. I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of person with my obsessions.
Yeah.
You're just someone who has like a lot to love at once. I really appreciate it. But also happy late birthday. Happy birthday in general.
Thank you. Season.
That's right.
And then also you should check out Love Heart. I don't know if you've seen it yet. It's the one with Nina Dobrev and Jimmy Ouyang.
Yeah, I said
that one was pretty funny too. Yeah. And then Harry Shum Jr. is also in it, and I like love him, but he's kind of like a villain in this movie, so it's an interesting take.
Yeah. Oh, like he's like the jerk older brother or something, right? Like, yeah. Okay. Looking forward to that.
But away from our tangent, diving into questions, we're going to start off with a little bit of research questions because we're just super interested to know about what came about crafting this book, especially because it is your debut novel. Even though I read super, super well, like I did not realize it was a debut novel at all. I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Thank you.
But the first question that we had for you is, what was the research process like when writing this book? Was there anything that was particularly difficult or challenging? And I think as a side to that, we were really curious, like, what was your Google search history looking like when you were writing this novel?
Okay, so my favorite, I really collect mugs, and so like my favorite coffee mug is one that I got as a thanks for like an event that I did that says like like don't look at my search history, like I'm a writer, not a serial killer or something like that, because I joke all the time that like I have to be on some sort of like FBI watch list, because like when I was originally planning out how I wanted the murder to happen, like I knew it'd be some sort of poisoning, because like it kind of goes naturally, like you're eating food, poisoning would be kind of a thing. But I was googling things like, I don't know, like best way to kill a diabetic, or like how long does it take to bleed out from a stomach wound, or like just really like oddly specific like things that like you could actually find the answers to, but like probably raise some flags. um as for research, like I did it in layers. So I mentioned to you like before we started, but this book took me about a year and a half to write. um and so I'm kind of a slow writer. And so with this book I was trying to really push myself to, because I had finished one book before this that never sold. It got me my first agent, but it never sold. But for that book it took me almost 3 years, because I kept polishing the first few chapters again, and never moving forward. And then sometimes I would get down like a research rabbit hole, and I'm like, no, like finish the story. So with this book I was like, write the story and worry about research later, which is good and bad. So for like the first iteration of this, I wrote about half of it and then sent it to 2 beta readers just to see like, is there something here, right? Is this something I should finish and continue? And both of them were mystery writers. One was a retired lawyer, and one is a pathologist, so she's a doctor. And both of them came at me like screaming, like this, like the way, like one of the plot lines, they're like, this couldn't happen, this is so illegal, you are violating HIPAA, like HIP, like
Yeah.
the patient privacy, like you are violating HIPAA like so badly. And I was like, oh, see, like there, one, thank goodness I didn't write the whole thing. Two, I'm like, man, I really maybe should have Googled something earlier, and like the worst part is like my brother's a nurse, so like if that had gone forward he would have been like, really? Yeah. But so I had to completely remove that plot and come up with something different, because like what they were screaming about was actually a pretty important piece. So I had to completely rewrite it from that point. But it actually made it better, because with the original, it's not spoilers because it's not in the book anymore. Like I had the character Bernadette, because she's a nurse, give Lila crucial information that she needed for the investigation, which, because she's a nurse, is and then I'm like, oh, but that's, if you think about it from a storytelling perspective, that's so lazy. Like she went to someone she knew, asked for information, and then got it with like no consequences, just like super easy, and went about her day. Like, no, like that's not, like, in an investigation you need like obstacles. She needs to be able to work for it. She just can't be like, oh, how convenient that her cousin is a nurse, and just gives her this information. So like it was kind of rough knowing how much I had to like go back, because I didn't do like very basic research into that. But at the same time it's like, oh, this is why you have beta readers, because they help you make your book so much stronger. They catch these things. So like that's, those are just like some of the things I had to do.
That sounds so interesting, because like now that if I think about what you wrote originally, and if that were to happen, then yeah, the suspense wouldn't be what it was, because I definitely remember like towards the end I was like, what's gonna happen, like what is going on? And then like when the final like twist happened I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But at the same time, like kind of I was like, "Ugh, maybe is it? Like I can't trust anyone, so who knows?" Yeah.
When I was reading the book, I was like wondering, my search history looks kind of grim. I could only imagine what the author is, because I was like, how does arsenic kill someone?
Yeah. And it's funny because like Arsenic and Adobo wasn't the original title. Like if you look at like the original announcement, the original title was Love, Loss, and Lumpia. Is how I sold it. But my editors were like, that's a great title, but it doesn't really read mystery. And and they were right. Like a title has to be able to tell you a lot just at first glance. It almost sounded like maybe like women's fiction or something. And so I sent them like just like a list of random titles that they could possibly. So they chose Arsenic and Adobo from the list that I had made. And so like I retroactively made arsenic a bigger thing in the plot. Like poisoning was always there, and then the thing with Kevin, like that was always like the main thing. But like the earlier poison was like a vague, like it was really, really vague. I'm like, I'm not gonna lie, in the original version that my editors bought. So when they settled on that title, I was like, oh, okay, like now I can actually ground it in research now that I know what the specific thing is. So like I retroactively did research on the poison and put more of it in there.
The title is definitely something that like got me to like really want to read the book. So I was like, this sounds so much fun.
Yeah, for sure. Are you a fan of true crime? Because I feel like this, because I listened to the audiobook, as I was listening to the audiobook, I was like, this feels like very like almost like serial, but not, but like fiction, also like fun and with like food and all this other stuff.
Like I have to admit, I'm not a huge fan of like true crime. And like if I do read true crime, I prefer it not to be like the murder stuff, just because like when like mystery is my favorite genre, but in my mind I can like this is fiction, even if it's sort of influenced by real events. Like these are not real people, like I can create that divide in my mind. Whereas with like true crime, like a serial kill, it's like it's so hard for me to not be like, am I just like reading about these people's tragedies as entertainment? It's like this weird like no judgment. Like I am not casting shade at anyone who loves true crime. I'm saying for me personally, I have trouble with that divide. But like true crime about like heists or like really weird like wacky crime things, like those I'm super into. Like in Canada where there was like that maple syrup heist for like millions of dollars. I was like, this is wild. Like that I'm totally into. But I try to write that, well, also the reason I like mystery, particularly cozies, is like I know there's gonna be a happy ending. I know justice will be served. Justice is not served in real life, so like that's what I'm looking for when I read most mystery. It's like that escape.
Yeah, I really liked going into this knowing that there would have been like a happy-ish type of ending.
Yeah.
As happy as it can be with the fact that it's a murder mystery.
Yeah, exactly.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah, this book was definitely a lot of fun, and I particularly really liked all the food parts. So, was Tita Rosie's restaurant actually inspired by like a real life restaurant? And did you grow up in the restaurant setting, or like was it mostly inspired by like home style food when you were growing up, or what?
Yeah, it's mostly inspired like my dad's cooking. So like I didn't have like a restaurant upbringing. Like when we were younger, we always said like my dad's food was so good he should run a restaurant. But like his family in the Philippines, like several his family members, like they had restaurants, and he grew up in a butcher shop. And so he was like, no, I know how hard it is to run a restaurant. It's like long hours, you don't have days off, like the profit margin is so slim, so he had like no interest in that. But it was like through him that I really learned to love food. It's through him, like the idea of like food as a love language, which it's like what I kind of tried to instill like in the Tita Rosie character, and even like in Lola Flor, who's like a little bit harsh, but like she shows her care like in the food that she prepares. Like that's mostly stuff that I got from my dad.
Yeah,
I love that. I think food is absolutely a love language in Asian culture, and I think that was definitely a pivotal point of the story that really came through.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. He was kind of, like he was like an old school, Filipino dude. Like he didn't say I love you, like there were not really hugs or kisses or anything like that. But he worked long hours, and still he would come home and every weekend and prepare this feast. And I grew up in a big house. I grew up like in a multi-generational household like her, like with my maternal grandparents, my parents, me, my brothers, my cousins, so like there were a lot of us. So for him to prepare a meal for like sometimes 9+ people on his days off, like that was him showing he cared. Waking up at like 5 a.m. to go to the fish market and get fresh seafood, stuff like that. It really spoke a lot.
What do you think was your dad's like best dish? Which might be hard to choose, but like what was your favorite that you would be like, I want him to make this today?
Oh wow, I don't even know how to narrow that down. I will say maybe like two of my favorite. So like one of my favorite dishes is kare kare. it's like this mixed stew, it's almost like a peanut base, kind of like our version of curry, with like oxtail and all these other things. Just because it's like really hard to make, and like the idea of me making it myself is just like that's not gonna happen. um, so I really love that. And then I think the other one I'm gonna say is just because like I haven't had it since in years since he made it. Excuse me. And it's a kind of adobo, but it's adobong pusit, which is like squid adobo.
Ooh.
And it uses like these like really small squid, and like I don't usually eat out at like Filipino restaurants, and in the ones that I have, like I don't really see that particular kind of adobo. It's really hard to make, especially now, like because you don't find that like in a regular grocery store. You have to go to the special markets, and so I get kind of nostalgic for that because I'm like I haven't had that in like I don't know 15 years, 20. It's been a really really long time since I've had that dish.
Mhm.
Dang,
Do you
now I'm
find
gonna just go out and try more of these foods.
Yeah, same. Do you find yourself cooking a lot at home as a result of, like, your upbringing with your dad and everything?
So I really like baking, which is part of the reason I made Lila a baker. Cooking is something that I like doing for a crowd. Like, so for example, like I always host the holidays. So like my family's coming over to my house for Thanksgiving. So like that's fine. But like everyday cooking, like for sustenance, it's so tiring. It's like I made food yesterday and now I have to make it again today because I want to eat and I'm hungry. Um, and also like if you're really making like these typical dishes, it's usually for like a crowd. It's like a lot. And my husband's a bit of a picky eater, so it's like cool, am I going to eat this giant pot every single day for the rest of the week, or am I just like not going to have this thing. I've gotten a little bit better at it, especially since like my father passed away a few years ago, and so I don't have his cooking anymore, and like my mom, like bless her, not a cook. Um, so if I want these dishes, like I kind of have to make them myself. So like once in a while, like the craving will hit, and like I know I have to make something, but I'm not as good about it as I should be.
Talking a little bit about the baking side of things, were these treats inspired by your own recipes that Lila bakes in the story?
All the recipes in the book are mine.
Love to see
Ooh!
it.
Yeah. So I mean, like I did like research on them, and I found a bit. So with my dad, he was like an old school cook. So he didn't use recipes. The measurements were very loose. Yeah, like if I watched him prepare his adobo, like he would just grab the bottle of soy sauce and pour. Right, there were not measuring cups and things like that. Um, so what I did is like I would find recipes online and kind of cobble them together that like looked right. And then I would just kind of keep adjusting the ingredients until they tasted the way I thought of them. Like the way his food tasted, which is in my mind the way Filipino food's supposed to taste, right? Because it's so personal. Um, Same thing with the baking. It's like I'm like, oh, like I've had this before, I've seen this before. Let me try a couple of recipes. Let me add my own spin on it. So like they're all like influenced by things I've seen in my life or online, but like they have my take on it.
Yeah, that's so cool. My sister's actually like a professional baker and she also makes like spin-off of like Asian flavors, and so I totally relate and I think that's like super fun. She also is like, "Oh yeah, I'm like experimenting with a flavor profile, so I'm like envisioning you do the same and then having those recipes in your characters super fun to read."
hmm I have like a whole like Google Doc of like all the different desserts I want to try. I'm like, man, I'm never gonna be able to fit this in everything. Like this better be like I don't know, like a 20-book series if I can bake all the things that I want.
We'll read it. We'll take it. Honestly, if you want to publish a cookbook, we'll take that too.
Yeah,
It's like
that's so
super fun.
fun.
Yeah, the baking is like when I'm procrastinating, I'm like, oh, I'm not procrastinating. It's research for the book, obviously, right? Because I'm supposed to include recipes. So that's like one of the really fun things.
We love to see that. So shifting tones a little bit to something a little bit more serious. So trigger warning, we're going to be talking a little bit about the war on drugs in the Philippines. So the question that we wanted to ask was how, in the author's note in the beginning, you mentioned that you received feedback from Filipino sensitivity readers, particularly about the war on drugs. So how did this impact the direction or the scenes that originally were centered around this topic? And did it change the way you presented any of like the specific scenes?
Yes and no. So like in the author, like the way I say in the author's note is that I was looking at my story as one as an American, and with that lens. And then two, also as like a big reader of mystery. So for me, like the those things are just like, oh, it's typical tropes that you see in all mysteries. But what my sensitivity reader put, made obvious to me, I was like, oh, but like my book is not only going to be read by Americans. It's not only going to be read by mystery readers, which, thank you to all of you who are like, oh, I don't usually read mystery, but your book looked fun. Like, oh, awesome. Thanks. But again, if you are not prepared for that kind of thing and you look at, this, bright, colorful cover with a dog on her shoulder and you're expecting something fun. And then you're just like, oh, like I really didn't want that like weird jolt, where like you were looking for something fun and like you were suddenly, triggered by something you weren't prepared for. So it's not, it was less that that it didn't necessarily change the trajectory. It helped, like, well, one, like that gave me the idea for the author's note with the content warning, because originally there wasn't going to be one, but I brought up with my editors, and they're like, oh, we didn't even think of that. That's a great idea. Can you please put an author's note, to include those content warnings? So like they were on board. Excuse me. But it was more like in certain scenes with like the investigation, like there was like certain nuances. Because also I realized that I didn't put enough nuance in some of those investigations because the fact that she's Filipino would obviously, well, the fact she's brown, that she's not white, would kind of influence the way she would react around the police. And I was veering to that territory where, again, I was following mystery tropes instead of following how the character would react. And so, I actually had to, so like there's one point where I think I have her realize that she would be possibly coming off as aggressive. So she kind of has to like lean, kind of like in her mind, realize how it would look from the outside that someone like her is being a little bit combative during a police. So she has to like, oh, wait a minute. In this town, I have to be careful of how I present myself. So it made me go back and realize, and be like, just because there are certain expectations in the genre doesn't mean your character has to act that way. In fact, she shouldn't act that way because she's not like those other mystery protagonists. There's a different nuance to her and her lived life that these other protagonists that you're used to reading wouldn't have to even think about. So it made me, delve a little deeper into like how I'm presenting my characters and like the life she really would have to live in that kind of way.
That is like really cool because then it's like shifting the perspective of things is like where you're writing from. And I really liked how you like focus on the characters because personally when I read for the characters as opposed to like the premise or the plot or like genre or anything else. I'm like, oh, I'm rooting for the characters. And that's also one of the big reasons why I like this book. We're gonna pivot into like plot and characters, and it's like great transition. But what's your favorite character and most challenging character to write? Like, was Lila more challenging to write because of that shift from the typical mystery tropes to focusing on her character?
In some ways, Lila was really easy to write, but also because I didn't want her to be me. If that makes sense, like she's not a self-insert character. In many ways, her voice is similar to mine. Because like, the way I write is like very conversational. Like I kind of want like that casual, fun, jokey kind of thing, but at the same time, we're not the same person. And I needed to keep reminding myself that no, like as I said, you're like, no, that's how you would react, or that's what you would say, but that's not what she would. So sometimes the fact that she was so easy actually made it difficult because I was like, no, you're working out your own thing. That's not you. Like, no, like I'd have to kind of pull back. As for the characters, Adina was a character I really enjoyed writing. She actually had like an entire subplot that I had to take out because she was so much fun, but she was also like, she's such a strong character that she can easily overtake the scene. And like editors were like, this is great, but this is Lila's story. And I'm like, true. Like that's like absolutely fair. Like, it's not a dual POV. It's not equally this. I needed to focus on who Lila was and what her journey was. And while Adina is her best friend and a fully realized character with her own life, it cannot become part of the main plot. It just has to support it. So I had to pull back on her like a lot, which is like it makes me kind of sad in some ways because there's like some nuance that is lost, particularly regarding Lila's feelings for Amir. Um, so because like part of it was about that, but at the same time, I was just like, well, the time that you have and the story you're trying to tell, it didn't fit in. So some nuance was lost, unfortunately, but I still think it was the right decision for the story overall.
I'm not saying I would read an entire series, like a spin-off series about Adina, but that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, I was literally just gonna ask. I was like, do you think you would write a spin-off series focusing on Adina, or like maybe if we have like more books within the series, we're able to focus on her in some kind of way?
Well, I in books 2 and 3, Adina and Elena do get like a little bit more focus, but at the same time, like not as again, like it's one of those like my my editors are like, this is great, but this is also a mystery. So like, can we pull back on this and put more of this? I'm like, ah, fair. So I don't know, maybe short stories, maybe a novella, but as for an actual series, I'm not sure about that.
We'll take a novella. We'll take what we can get.
Your readers are happy to see whatever you write.
So Lila's family is obviously very loving and very large, from the calendar crew to her Lola to her cousins that constantly she gets compared to. Was a lot of these characters inspired by your own family? Did you find yourself like referencing or basing people off someone that you knew in your life?
Not like specifically, other than like the Lola Flor character, which is like very heavily based on my maternal grandmother who I grew up with, but even then they diverge in many ways. But everyone else is kind of like an amalgamation. Um, so like the calendar crew, you know, I kind of think it was like the Greek chorus. I can't remember. Was that in your notes? Someone said it recently, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what I was trying to do. It's like if you know, it's like they're always together. Like they're never like you never just see one at like the restaurant. Like they're always together. Um, and I just they kind of just stand for like the aunties we all have in our lives. Blood related or not. A lot of times not even blood related, which makes it like, wow, you really think you could say that? Okay. Cool, 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 cool. And like I said, so like it's a lot of it is, it's like I say it's like 1/3 based on people, like things that have actually been said to me. So like when Ninang April is like, oh, you get bigger every time I see you. That has been said to me. I knew that had to make it in the book somewhere. 1/3 like stories that my friends have told me, because like a lot of my friends have much wilder stories than I do. Because like I wasn't part of like a large Filipino community growing up. Like for me, the Filipino community was my family. I didn't really have a lot of large exposure to that. And then another third is just like, well, this is fiction, have some fun with it, so it's this huge mix, and sometimes it's actually really hard for me to pick out like, was that a story someone told me, or is that something I made up? I can't even remember, which is like good in my mind, I've mixed it all so well. It's kind of hard to pick out anything specific.
Yeah, that is really cool because then like the lines between like reality and fiction are blurred, and then like fiction feels real, as that is like kind of like the point of like fiction and like storytelling. And so yeah, I definitely felt that when I read the aunties. I was like, I know you guys.
Yeah. And like I don't know, for good or bad, that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about hearing like from other readers. Like I've done like library events, and like people who are like not Filipino, not Asian, who are like, oh, I know those characters. I have those aunties in my life. So it's like one of those like cross-cultural things where, you would think you're being so specific, that like maybe like people won't really connect, but because you're being specific, everyone's like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I can connect in this way. Maybe it's slightly different, but like I get it in general, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool.
Yeah. It's really, really refreshing to see something like very specific and familiar in a setting that is really unfamiliar, and that like there's murder and there's mystery going on. um Throughout the entire book, we all kept guessing and guessing wrong who the potential murderer would be. Did you always intend for Kevin to be the murderer?
So for that, yes. But for like again, I'm sorry to jump to one of your later questions, but for Mrs. Long, no, actually. So I kind of so with my first book, again, like I mentioned before, like it nothing ever happened with it. I pantsed it, which if they're not, it means like I wrote by the seat of my pants. I had no idea what was happening. I just like I didn't know who the killer was. I just wrote, and which is why it took me almost 3 years. Um, but for the second book, like I didn't write a full outline, but I took a few minutes to write out some beats. I'm like, I know this, and this. Let's go. And so one of those things I wanted to know ahead of time was the killer. Um, because it makes it easier for me to like seed certain things in, and because if I know where I'm working towards, I can figure out all the in betweens. If I have no idea where I'm going, it can feel kind of scary, kind of vast. I'm like, I have no idea where I'm going. Hopefully this pulls, I mean, I still feel like that, but at least there's like a light at the end of the tunnel. um but when I also originally thought he would be the one who killed Mr. Long. Because I don't know, like maybe Mr. Long tried to blackmail him because he figured out that was it. Yeah. In my original like outline, Mr. Long tried to blackmail him because he realized, I know what you did. I know it was you who killed Derek, da da da. And so like he killed him like to keep him quiet. Like that's how it was. But then as I was revising things, and like deepening certain characters, like Derek's mom became more of like a tragic character for me, and I felt like she needed like a little bit more. And as I kind of delved into who she was, like I saw like, oh, like she was like in an abusive relationship, like, and there was all these different things that like that maybe I necessarily didn't put on the page, but I knew about her. And then I reached the point where I was just like, no, like she dealt with this shitty man in this abusive relation for so long, and to find out he was part of the reason that her only child is dead, like that would be the thing, right? That really sets her off. And so in my mind, it made more sense. It made more sense, and it also had more emotional resonance for me, and like for what it would mean to Lila when she figures that out, to have it be that way.
Yeah, I think we're jumping all over the place, but I really like how you. I don't know if you like explicitly say like there's a big difference between the two types of murders, because obviously murder is murder and murder is bad. But I think like there's that subliminal messaging of their situations were different, and I don't know. I thought that was really nice to read.
Mm-hmm. And that was also because again, like the idea, even for like, it like overall, like I hope it really was a light, entertaining read, but also the idea of like what justice looks like is different for certain people, and it's not so clear cut. Because as you said, like, yeah, murder is bad, but sometimes, there are extenuating circumstances, and like whether you agree or not, this is how certain people think, and this is how realistically certain things would play out. And Lila had a choice. And I feel, the choice she made is the right choice for her character and in how she viewed, considering all the things that she's learned along the way. It was a realistic choice that she made as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'd also say like I really enjoyed just watching the story come along. For me, when I was just talking to everyone in the group chat about what was going on, I was like, Mr. Long is the murderer. I'm calling it now. And then I'm like, wait, that's maybe too obvious. And people are like, yeah, Tiffany, maybe not. Don't guess too soon. And then I was like, read a little bit more. And I was like, it's Kevin. It's definitely Kevin. The foreshadow. But moving like back to like the serious side, I definitely like agree, and I really liked how you portrayed it, and that was a big pivotal point to Lila's character. And I guess in a similar vein, as we learn more about Derek, we get to see that he was trying to improve his life before his untimely death. And did you always intend for him to also be a bit of a morally gray character rather than just like a very obvious antagonist / villain to the story?
Honestly, no, he was a very flat character. Like in my original, even until like when I gave it to my editors, he was very flat. And because in my mind, he was just meant to be a catalyst, like he was not supposed to be an important character. He was just supposed to be what sets off like Lila's journey, basically. But then my editors were like, because I think it was a point where like it was already in there that she had kind of like hooked up with him, like when she came back to town. And then they were like, it doesn't really feel real that she would get together with this like awful person, considering all, like, even if she didn't know at first that what he was writing, she's like, why? Like, she was in a low point, but why him and not like some other rebound or whatever? And I was just like, oh, okay. So like, I might have to make him a person. And then I was trying to think like, who was he? Why did he become this way? What caused him to start doing this? Like, I had vague ideas beforehand, but like I didn't put it in the manuscript because I was like, that's not necessary. And then I realized, well, giving it some nuance, but still not trying to make him out to be a good guy, like it would make Lila's character and what she had to go through a little bit more clear. I think. It would make the choices that Derek made more clear. It would make the choices that Kevin made more clear. In my mind, at least as I was trying to work on it, I was working on the revisions. I'm like, oh, okay. If he did this, then it makes sense that this happened. And that's why, so it was one of those kinds of things where like the clearer I made his backstory, the better it made the other characters and the choices that they made.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's kind of like how I think about Mrs. Long and how you were talking about how she was like in an abusive relationship as opposed to like Kevin, where you're like, oh, he's the bad guy, but they both did terrible things. They both murdered someone. But it's like, oh, like what is justified, and understanding that there's like more to the story than just like, oh, someone was a bad person,
Mm-hmm.
and like understanding like why the villains did what they did. It was all
Mm-hmm.
very interesting and very fully fleshed.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted that, it's, like, even if it's like a terrible reason, like I feel like every villain, like they had in their mind it was justified. Like in Kevin's, like he has zero remorse. He was just like, nah, that guy got what was coming to him. Like in his mind it was justified. Um, and that's how I had to write these things and figure it out. Not every person necessarily like that, that it's in my future books are going to be like that, but like for certain ones, that kind of certainty um helps me build the character and like what kind of story I'm trying to tell.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, like, recently I said something where I was like, "Oh, murder can be justified," but I didn't mean it in that way. I meant it not like, "Oh, it will be a murder," but I meant it like, "Oh, for a lot of people, they think that murder can be justified because
Mhm.
it's not like someone is going to, like, do something intentionally and be like, 'Oh, I know this is a bad thing, and I'm still gonna go and do it.'" Like, a lot of what's scary for a lot of, like, murderers or, like, serial killers is that they think that they're doing what is righteous to them, and they're like, "Oh, yes, I'm doing a good thing by killing all these people." And
Mhm.
it's, like, very, like, what is going on in your head?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the way that, people justify, I mean, it was revenge in Kevin's part. It's like you like um he had very little family, and in his mind Derek took away what family he had left.
Mhm.
Um However unintentionally it was. And so he felt he was right.
Mhm.
Sure. Pivoting a little bit away from murder, let's talk a little bit more about Lila and her hometown and her relationship with it.
Mhm.
So, a major theme in the story is that Lila left her hometown, which impacts her relationship with her family and her best friend. This theme is one that many of us can relate to when it comes to family expectation and personal desires. Was this drawn from like personal experience?
So originally I would say no, but so I was doing an interview for like one of my local, like I'm in a Chicago suburbs, like one of Chicago suburban like papers was interviewing me about this. And they were, we were talking about like how I got into writing. And so basically like after I graduated from college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I went overseas to teach English in South Korea for about 3.5 years. Um, so I was in Korea, 3.5 years, and I had it was an amazing time. I learned a lot about myself. I had a lot of fun. I traveled the world. And then I came back home, and, at that time I was like gonna be turning 30 soon. It was like a year after I had returned, I was like really in a rut. I was like, I was 29, 28, 29. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be 30 soon. I'm back at home. I'm doing the same thing I always did with the same people. I mean, these are people I love, but like, is this it? You know, I had lived half a world away on my own having adventures, and now this is what I'm doing. Um, and that's why I started writing, because I wanted to do something for me. Because I was an English major in college, but I had never taken a creative writing class because those are expensive. Um, so the way I got into writing is I literally just Googled Chicago writing workshop, and I found a 1-day mystery writing class. And even though I loved reading mysteries, I never thought about writing them. I actually thought I would be a kidlit author, or like maybe like sci-fi fantasy, because like those were the ones I really loved when I was younger. But I was like, oh, okay, whatever, the price is right. And I went, and like the story, which was not this story, it was again it was the book before this, that I came up with, like my teacher Lori Rader Day, she's like, is this your first time? I was like, yeah. She's like, I think you're a mystery writer. She's like, there's something here, and I really think you need to continue this. And at the time, she was the president of the Mystery Writers of America, a Midwest chapter. And she was like, hey, we have these meetings. They're free. Why don't you come and learn a little bit more and, meet some other writers? And, thanks to her kind of like reaching out her hand, like I became very involved in the mystery world. And so, so I was telling this really long-winded story about like my quarter life crisis. And that's why I started writing. And the interviewer was just like, oh, well, it's kind of similar to Lila, right? How she went away from home, she experienced a larger world, and she had to come back home and she feels stuck. And I was just like, excuse me? He's like, yeah, like you don't see those parallels of how like you left, you had the bigger world and you came back and now you're not really sure what to do with yourself. So you started a new venture. And I was just like, well, now I do. At the time, the closest thing we had, I did start with the kernel of like what I call like big fish in a small pond. Because like the neighborhood I grew up in is like working class, lower middle class, majority like Latina, Hispanic neighborhood, right? So I was not like a lot of the other Filipinos that my parents were friends with. Like they were more middle class and had, much more money. So and my neighborhood is really small. And so like I had that big fish in a small pond syndrome. Even though I was in Chicago, which is a huge city, I still felt like really confined by where I was born and raised. And and I transferred that to Lila because like, oh, I mean, being from a small town, which is I think I have it like they're less than 20,000 people, she would really have that feeling. So like I transferred that feeling to her, but I hadn't made the connection about like, my coming back, like my quarter life crisis spawning like my writing journey, until that interviewer pointed it out. And I was like, this is wild. What you subconsciously put on the page, and what you show people that you don't even realize about yourself.
So glad I didn't have to get called out like this.
I know. Like I was like, because it was like a Zoom interview, and I was just like, what? I was like, excuse me? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, oh my God. Oh.
Lots to think about. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of people who like move away from home, specifically like away to a different city, like not just a different building, but within the same city, like may experience that or like some similar feeling. And so I feel like it was very, very relatable to a lot of people, and personally for me too.
Thanks. Yeah.
Zan and I are at that point of our lives where like we are moving away from our homes, and then I don't know when we come back, but that quarter life crisis is gonna hit us some point.
Definitely. Well, I can anticipate it.
So a bit of a fun-ish question. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the meme. It's like, looks like a cinnamon roll could kill you. Looks like they could kill you is a cinnamon roll. Looks like a cinnamon roll is a cinnamon roll. And then looks like they could kill you would kill you. And we wanted you to like match each of the four to a character in the book.
Like I was actually thinking when you sent that question, I was like, ooh, that's an interesting question. Because I love me a cinnamon roll hero. So I'm like, I feel like, let's see. So Elena's not a huge character in book one, but she is in the later book. So I feel like maybe she looks like a cinnamon roll, but she could kill you. Because in my mind, she's like a very like, she's kind of like a soft, like she knows her mind, but she's a little bit soft spoken. She's the chill one of the trio, is how I'm planning her out, because I need someone to balance like these Adina and Lila out, because like they're just gonna get themselves killed if they don't have someone chilling them out. But like she has like a really, really strong inner core. Looks like they could kill you and would kill you. Probably Adina or Bernadette. Definitely. Looks like a cinnamon roll is a cinnamon roll. Probably Jay.
Yeah.
Let me see now. Is there anyone of them? Oh, looks like they could kill you is secretly a cinnamon roll. That one is interesting. I wonder. I'm gonna have to think on that one for a little bit.
Ooh, that was fun to know. I'm like, oh, Jade's definitely like.
Yeah. Jay was the one where I was like, he is definitely looks like a cinnamon roll and is a cinnamon roll. Definitely. All the other ones, I'm like, I feel like it's kind of hard.
Maybe that last one that might be a mirror because I feel like in my mind he's just like very sharp looking all the time, but inside he's just so kind. He really is. But like on the outside, he's like, got to get it done, type A, everything in place. So like maybe.
I totally feel that because one of my favorite scenes in the book was when they have like that dinner party and then Jay's invited and Amir's invited and then they're like, who are you? What's going on? And then Amir's just like, who got you flowers? On the outside, but like you can obviously tell like when he's leaving the party, he's like, I don't want to go. Like, wait, like can you call me later? What's wrong?
That scene was like so much fun to write, but it was also really hard. I'm like, why do I keep writing scenes where there's like 10 people? Because now I'm just like, how do I fit them all in? I'm like, oh my God, like this person showed up and then never saw them again the rest of the scene. And like, I have to like balance all these things. I keep doing it. There's always like a dinner scene in these books. I'm just like, well, of course they all have to get together, but writing that dialogue is like, oh.
That was so fun. It kind of felt like almost like fan fiction-esque like world outside. It was so like fun, refreshing, like fluffy, and then like we go back to like murder, like what's going on in the story.
I know I keep dropping like those rom-com things in there and then just like
yeah. And we're transitioning into some final things, but then like we also have like a set of questions after, so it's not really like final things. But we're super excited for Homicide and Hollow Hollow. Can you share anything about what we can expect in book 2? You already shared a little bit in the beginning, but like some more.
Yeah, sure. So the reason I chose the setting I did, like I like to joke is like, oh, what are some things that small towns and Filipinos have in common? Their love of beauty pageants. So like I knew beauty pageants would like be part. It's so funny, like writing book 2, I kind of like retroactively started making different like backstory for Lila. So the beauty pageant is the Miss Teen Shady Palms beauty pageant, which Lila has a connection to, a history with. And the head judge is killed and her cousin Bernadette is the main suspect. And so like they still like they're okay, but they still have that kind of frenemy rival thing going on. And like their history is kind of tied not just to that one particular pageant, but that does heavily is part of their backstory, but also like their moms were best friends. And Lila's mom is passed away, but she was a beauty queen in the past, and she kind of like the moms had the kind of relationship where they would compete using their daughters basically, which is like something I see a lot of people do. So that's why like Lila and Bernadette's friendship is so complicated in some ways. So even though like the mom's deceased, even though nobody is forcing them to compete, they still have like these weird instincts. And so book 2 is, yes, obviously very much about them solving the murder, but it's also a lot about Lila trying to come to terms with certain things in her past. So I say this in the author's note for book 2, but book 2 is like slightly heavier. I mean, it's still a cozy, right? There's still no graphic violence. There's still a happy ending. Don't worry. But one thing I have trouble with in cozy mysteries is like, I know there's supposed to be escapes, but it always feels so ridiculous to me that there's never like a reckoning of like what just happened to them in the previous book. It's just like you just were almost like you solved multiple murders, you were almost murdered yourself, but you're just like everything is fine, like your mental health is awesome, like nothing's going on. So I felt like I had to touch on that. So like mental health is also kind of a theme in book 2 as well. So it touched on her past. We found out a little bit about Lila's past, her connection to her mother, her relationship with Bernadette, and then also dealing with like some mental health issues.
I'm so excited. This sounds so good. I'm glad that it's going to be February, not like mid, like late 2022.
Mhm.
So you also just mentioned you submitted book 3. Are you working on anything else right now? Not to like put pressure on you to like continue writing. You definitely deserve a break. But do you see yourself writing maybe other genres in the future? Is there anything else you would love to explore or any other idea? Like, would you want more of a Shady Palms universe?
I
What's going
want,
on?
well, both. So like I definitely, so like the way it works is that, so I have 3 books in my contract and I turned it in, and Berkeley, my publisher, has the option to buy more in the series. So like that's what what I need to work on is start plotting out books 4, 5, 6 in the hopes that they want them. So that's something I'm working on. I'm also working on, I also have an idea for another series, like just in case, I don't know, for some reason the series didn't sell well or they don't want to continue the series, you know, I want to have something else I can maybe, you know, sell them in the future. So there's another coterie series that I'm kind of working on. I would love to write a rom-com someday. Like, so I started reading like almost exclusively romance as of last year because everything is terrible and I really need the happiness and love and joy that romance brings, which really made me want to try writing my own. I don't know how I'm going to handle sex scenes. There's a reason I write cozy mystery, but we'll tackle that when it comes. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I've always wanted to write kidlit. So like, you know, a dream goal, like not anytime soon, because I think it's going to take too much research, but is like to maybe write like a middle grade fantasy series centered around like Filipino mythology. Like that's something I want to do eventually. So lots of ideas. I want to continue this series. I would love to explore further stories with Lila and her crew. But if my publisher decides not to, I do have other things that I'm trying to work on.
That's so exciting. Well, I know I will be reading all the books, all of your books in the future. And hey, Berkeley, I think you should plot books 4, 5, and 6. Yeah, I'm very excited. Oh, that sounds
Thank you.
yeah, amazing. What do you hope for your readers to get out of your stories, and do you have any last messages for your readers?
Um, I guess, you know, like not to be like too cheesy or cliché, but like, you know, that people of color, particularly Asians, like we can be like kind of the heroes of our own story, that our stories don't have to be about our trauma or our pain. Our stories can be about us having fun and finding love, and they can be about joy and all different kinds of things. Like we don't have to be boxed in by one particular, you know, um, immigrant experience or whatever they try to push on you. Like that was really important to me with this book. And so that's also like one of like the best things, you know, like some of the reader responses. Like I actually got an email from someone who read the book, and she was just like, you know, she's also Asian American, she's writing her first mystery, and she said her earlier stories all had white protagonists, and she didn't realize that she was like subconsciously doing that because all the mysteries she's read had white protagonists, so she thought that's how they were supposed to be. But then she's like, oh, but then I read your book and then I realized, oh, I don't have to do this. Like I can write someone with my own background, and like and you know, and it could still sell. Like it could still be a story. It doesn't have to be like that. And I was like, oh yes. Yes, you can write like whatever we can be in whatever genre. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So just like something, you know, just like see the possibilities that are out there, and like don't box yourself in. The world is going to do that enough, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
When
love that. I think that's, oh, you go, Zan.
Okay, I was gonna say when Tiffany and I were like brainstorming questions, we were like, we realized that it's like so comforting to read just like a fun book with Asian characters, and it doesn't have to be like traumatizing like, about like all of the history and all of our trauma. Like, of course, like those stories are also important, but then like it is very, very nice just to read like a fun story that has Asian characters and Asian culture and like all of this other stuff, and it doesn't have to just be about like we had tiger moms and we have
Mhm.
horrible or not horrible, but like aunties that made mean comments sometimes, or like
Mhm.
all of these other things. Like it can be fun and it can have it all.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I finished this book in a day because I was like, this book is just so entertaining. And I, exactly like Xan said, I was like, it was very much of a refresher to not have to dive into like so much of the trauma of our culture. Like, granted, it is a big part of what makes us us, but I
Mhm.
think it was just really refreshing to read and such a great time to begin with.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and again, like, the point is, like, it's not that those books aren't necessary, it's that we deserve the
Mhm.
choice. We deserve, like, the wide spectrum of our lived experiences, right? You know, I think there's great value in entertainment,
Yeah.
especially nowadays, as I said.
Yeah.
But there's also great value in, like, reading those harder stories because those are also just very real, you know? Like,
Mhm.
I want both.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Same.
So we're coming a little close to time, so we're gonna do a little. We have this or that we wanted to ask you. So small town versus big city.
Um, for me personally, big city, but for my stories, I kinda like small towns.
Ooh, okay. The question that I'm very, very invested in. Team Amir, Team J.
Okay, so as I told you before, so I cannot say anything directly right now, but I will say in book 2, I'm sorry, like I hope it's not a disappointment, but in book 2 I very obviously have a side, or I should say Lila very obviously has a side. And in book 3 like the decision is made. Because you know, again, I only had 3 books that I was guaranteed in my contract, and I kinda hate when, like, if like, when things end, I'm like, "Wait, what?" Like, there was no so, like, I kinda made sure at least that part is wrapped up by book 3. But yeah, due to certain events in book 2, she starts to lean pretty heavily one way, and in book 3, there's a definite thing. And mine and
Ooh.
Lila's, tastes align, I will say.
Okay.
I'm so invested. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
I didn't
Just
even realize how one-sided my original draft of book 2 was until my editors were like, "You know, that love triangle was a lot of fun. You wanna maybe play with that a little bit?" And I was like, "Oh, shoot. I forgot to include this one thing." Okay. So I had to, like, revise certain things to explain it away, but yeah.
do you feel like any part of book 1 foreshadows who Endgame might be, or is it like very? It could go either way right now.
Ooh. I feel like it could go either way. Like with book 1, there are very strong arguments to be made on either side. Um,
Okay.
and in the beginning of book 2, you're like, "Okay," and then, like, it starts to go and you're like, "Oh, okay, she's clearly making a choice."
Dang.
Oh, I'm stressed. This is stressing me out more than
She's
the
really
murder.
out here trying to pull at straws. She's like, "This is gonna be quick," and then she's like, "Wait, I need to know. I need to know."
Okay, next question then. Restaurants versus cafes.
Ooh. I think like, as a writer, like, cafes, like, just that chill hangout, you know, and especially since so many, like, also do offer, like, small plates and, like, fun snacks and things like that, I might lean a little more towards cafe.
Okay. And then last one, sweet versus savory.
Mm, that's so hard.
I
I
know.
love food. I love food so much. Um, I guess if we're gonna lean towards, like, what I make more often, sweet.
Okay.
I'm much more of a baker than a cook.
Very nice.
Okay, some final questions. Your most anticipated 2022 release.
Um, I wanna say probably Like a Sister by Kelly Garrett. She was my mentor, and she also writes, like, really funny, like, amateur sleuths. Like, so her original series was a really funny amateur sleuth. She describes it as, like, a mega broke, semi-famous Black actress, who you know, like, sometimes, like, billboards will say, like, "Oh, like, if you know information about X, call this number and you'll get a reward." So
Yeah.
basically, like that book starts that she sees that and she was just like, "Oh, that person looks familiar." And then like her parents' like house is gonna be like repossessed. And so she's like, "Oh, if I call that hotline about that information I know, I could save my parents' house." And so like she like becomes an amateur sleuth like accidentally by just trying to save her parents' house. Um but like a sister, it's different. It's a standalone and it's more like it's a little bit more suspense, like psychological suspense. It's like a woman who finds out her estranged sister, who was like kind of like a famous influencer, died, and they say it was an overdose, but she doesn't believe it. And so she's trying to like solve like the death of her sister and figure out like what really happened to her.
Oh, that sounds so good.
Mhm. Yeah, so Like a Sister by Kelly Garrett.
Okay, we'll definitely add that to 2022 TBR. What is a book that you'd recommend to everyone? Very hard.
Ooh. I'm gonna cheat and recommend a series because I can't choose one. The Lady Sherlock series by Sherry Thomas is like my current fave. It balances the perfect of like really, really great twisty mysteries, like fantastic characters, and like the best slow burn romance. The best. Because Sherry Thomas mostly writes romance. Like this is her first foray like into like she writes lots of other things as well, but I think this is her first foray into mystery. And like the characters are so interesting, but like the romance and the relationship between Charlotte Holmes and like her best friend like Lord Ash is I love it so much.
Okay, I'm gonna try to pick this up. This
Yeah.
might be my Thanksgiving read.
Yeah, like it's not a cozy. There are some dark elements in certain cases, but like it's balanced by like the characters and the romance and things like that.
Yeah, so really sold me at slow burn romance.
Yeah,
We want to suffer.
books and books and books before things happen.
Oh, okay. This is also probably going to be a very difficult question, but favorite Filipino dish and favorite food in general.
Ooh, okay. Well, I think I mentioned it earlier. I think it's so hard to choose because I'm also partial to the soups, but I'm gonna say kare kare. Which again, it's like it's a peanut sauce, and it usually has like oxtail and tripe and vegetables and all these things, and you eat it with bagong, which is like a fermented shrimp paste.
Ooh.
And I think it's my favorite just because like it's really time consuming to make, and as I said, my dad made it like hours of like pressure cooking and preparing, and so like it really felt and tasted like love. So that's something I really enjoy. Favorite food in general. Ooh, I don't know. Asian noodle soups. I'm gonna say a category. Asian noodle soups are like my ultimate like comfort.
Yes, it's also perfect for this type of weather, like especially because Chicago's probably freezing right now, and we're in the fall winter times.
Yeah, but like ramen, pho, lomi, like all the different kinds. Laksa. Oh, I love it all.
Yeah, it feels like a warm hug.
It does.
Yes. Well, I think those are all the many questions we had for you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to just chat with us. We loved reading Arsenic and Adobo, and now we're so hyped for Homicide and Halo Halo. Do you have any last messages or last things you want to say?
Just again, thank you so much for taking a chance, on my debut. Thank you for, your kind comments and I really hope you pick up the next books because again, I need to sell this option if you want more.
Yeah, we'll support as much as they can.
Thank you everyone who's joining the chat. We really appreciate you being here, especially even if you're like rewatching after it's over. Our book for December is going to be Against the Loveless World by Susan Abohawa, which is a story about a young Palestinian refugee. So look out for more information about that. We're happy to chat with you, and thank you all for watching.
Yay! Thank you.